Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast, the podcast with far better audiovisual skills than GB News. And today we have a very special guest. We have Richard Maxwell, who's here to join us to talk about his book and his work on the science of marketing. So firstly, welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
No, you're very, very welcome. Now, loads of Lib Dems always talk about how we get our message across. Do we do it right? We've got the policies, but we might not have the way of getting it across. And I suppose your work has been about how we bridge that gap.
Yeah, so we tend to apply science to our policies really well. Really well. We're really good at it. We go into depth. We have lots of different focus meetings at conference where we go into detail and the exact way of approaching a policy. But when it comes to communications, we tend to throw that all out the window. What we tend to do is more of a Renaissance approach to communications, where we assume everyone thinks consciously. So we assume if we give them the facts, like we did in the referendum, we just give them the facts and they'll just take it on board, realize we're right and we're very clever, and then they'll vote for us. But it's just not how people think. And so we need to apply the science, not just to the policy, but to the communications as well.
I suppose it's applying the science to the fact that some people don't think scientifically. And this, again, you talked about the Brexit referendum. One thing that I would say the Leave campaign did very well, it invoked people's gut instincts. You know, if you looked at all the facts, all the figures, people would vote Remain. Or the vast majority of people would vote Remain. But actually, what Vote Leave did was to people's kind of hearts and their guts, and thought, right, this is what we're going to go for. And I think that's what's sometimes lost in Lib Dems, that they think, well, if we just give them facts, then everything else will be easy.
Yeah, exactly. So we thought we were very smart in the EU referendum campaign by giving the exact facts and disputing all their facts. But in fact, they were actually the ones which were much smarter with communications. They were doing things like employing physicists to do their social media campaign. They were going through behavioral sciences and looking at what exactly works, what's been tested and proven. So they were way ahead of us on this. And they used that science to convince people, not just consciously, but subconsciously. And that's the key, is if you look at all of our different ways of building up a campaign, even when we've got money, we look at how consciously people think. So we knock on their door, say, why do you want to vote for whoever? Or we go to a focus group and say, what's your opinion on this subject? And they consciously tell you what they think they believe, but they can't tell you what subconsciously they're thinking. And when you look at studies done by Harvard in particular, our subconscious thinking dominates our brain. It's about 95%. So that's 19 out of 20 of our thoughts are done subconsciously. We're not consciously aware of it, but we tend to put out our outputs of why we do things consciously. So if somebody asks you why you voted for whatever party, you might come up with a conscious output of a policy, but really the decision's made beforehand, subconsciously. Yeah. And this has been shown in MRI scans that you can predict whether someone's going to press a button in the left hand or a button in the right hand. You can do that prediction beforehand, looking at subconsciously which areas of the brain light up, so before they consciously make a decision.
And so, is this where the intrinsic kind of almost political values of a political party come across? So the Tories have actually had a rubbish record on, say, law and order or the economy. But actually, if you talk to the average voter, they'll say, I trust them with the economy more.
Yeah. So defense is a perfect one. They seem like they're really good on defense, but they're not. They've put defense for years and years, and they've got rid of battalions, they've got rid of groups, and they've overspent in some areas where they shouldn't have been, and underspent in others, some basic things, just like personal protective equipment for our troops. But yet their perception is that they're all very strong, and therefore people go along with it. Rural communities as well, farmers seem to think that it's good for that. It's not. The Conservatives are awful for farmers, but they have that perception, and the perception wins out because people don't look through the policy areas.
And actually, and not just to keep it about the Conservatives, I should say that I have a lot of issue with the fact that the Labour Party gets to we're slightly changed a little bit with the electoral calculus, but Labour are always there for the working class. Well, actually, some Labour policies have been terrible for the working class in terms of they seem to have an objective to keep the working class as working class instead of lifting them out of poverty.
Yeah. I mean, traditionally, you look at cities, Labour tend to be more on developers' side than working class community sides. We see it in Birmingham when I'm living at the moment, and we've seen it in Manchester as well. Very often, the policy areas with the Labour and the Conservatives don't fit with their narratives, but they're both quite clever. Labour are actually quite clever about staying generally on message, which does help them. I think that's more that they're so bad in other areas that it does help them to keep their head above the water. I was just going to say, we need to start thinking about how people think subconsciously, how we access that, and how we build up a brand using that information. And
that was going to be my next question. So in terms of, we hear it fairly regularly. I don't know what the Liberal Democrats stand for. Is it actually Labour's getting a bit of that now, to be fair. They have found themselves in a bit of a black hole in terms of their identity. So, I mean, I know what LibDems stand for. You might know, but actually the instinctive subconscious kind of, okay, I know LibDems believe in fairness and equality and all the rest of the things. How do we build that brand then?
Well, that's the interesting one. So if you look at our constitution, the freedom from's freedom to. Yeah. Freedom is the key word there, but we seem to be very scared about using that word freedom. And in my book, shameless plug, but we live in shameless times, so I'll do that. But in my book, the metaphor section in there goes through how you can build up a brand using deep fundamental concepts. A Harvard professor called Zaltzman calls it a deep metaphor, but it's basically a fundamental concept. Something like journeys, something like balance, fairness, you mentioned, transition or change, which has been used a lot in politics. One of them is control. And really, the referendum campaign, in a weird way, was kind of a liberal message with a very illiberal background to it, an illiberal policy. It was almost but talking about the freedom of the country instead of the freedom of the individual. Yeah. So if we could build up our brand on control, which is essentially what freedom's about, it's about who has control. Does the individual have that control themselves? We can start building up a brand which is approachable and is actually what we believe in. Because just like you said, I've been to numerous parties where people have been very educated, they know a lot about the news, and they can't tell me what the Lib Dems are about. They come up to me and start talking about tuition fees still or something like that. And I say, oh, that's interesting. Do you know what the Lib Dems actually believe? And they go, oh, no, I don't, no idea. I've just heard.
Because there's a vacuum there. That's why. So if you don't have that, if you don't fill that space, then they fill it with what have you heard about the Lib Dems? Well, it's tuition fees. It's about, if they were on one side of politics, as in the kind of Brexiteer side, all they know about the Lib Dems is being pro-EU. They fill it with that what limited knowledge they have, and that means you're not controlling that narrative.
Exactly. Yeah, it's key. It's controlling the narrative, which we struggle to do because we don't have the media base to do it. Which is partly what you talked about GB News earlier, that GB News is a base for the Conservatives to put out whatever they want. Same with a lot of the press at the moment as well. But Labour have got it with the Guardian's very much on their side, the Mirror, as on side as left-wing papers tend to be. But yeah, we can build up a brand which is actually to do with what we believe in, and then we'll keep people. Because at the moment, our brand at a local level is just a local champion. It hasn't got that extra layer to it. So you've got competency, and that's what you're really communicating with the local champion. But we haven't communicated why they do what they do. We're only talking about how good they are. It's not why they're actually doing it.
Yeah, we have competency, but not vision. And I think I've studied my own ward for years and years and years, watched the difference between a local vote and a general election vote. Yeah. Exact same box numbers. So in 2019, we got just shy of 60% of the vote for myself. In the same box count for the general election, that went down to maybe 20, maybe even 19% of the exact same people, because we are very good at being the people you can trust locally to get stuff done, but we haven't built in that vision. And if we haven't got that vision, then, like I say, subconsciously people don't know. They might go, "Oh, John Potter's brilliant," but actually I have no idea what the Lib Dems stand for.
Yeah, and if you're voting for someone, you want to know what they generally believe in, don't you? Because if they're just going to carry out one policy, then what's going to happen when a issue comes up? So if you're going to vote for a political party, what happens if a pandemic comes up? You don't know unless you look at what they believe in. And Boris Johnson's shown himself that he's very much been about his own power over anything else, and what he actually believes in has come out. So voters quite rightly look at what you believe in and subconsciously and consciously pick it up. So I think it's worth always talking about what we believe in and conveying that.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their LibDem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help LibDems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, LibDem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem Podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. And it's something I don't do much as a local party and as a local campaigner. I mean, I've tended just to stay. It's very comfortable to be the competent local champion because no one can really have a problem with that. If I'm sticking up for my street, it's John Potter's just got this new crossing in his ward. There's very few people who will be unhappy with me giving a damn about their area. Yeah. If you start giving a vision, you have to accept that some people aren't going to like it.
Yeah. Well, what you can do is when you're doing your local champion communications, just don't make that the focus of everything. So you have a thread of, let's say, control throughout it. So why do you want to increase funding for social care? It's because you want people to have the freedom to be able to rely on those services. And you don't even have to use the word freedom. It's about enabling people. It's about meaning that people don't have to be sometimes carers themselves or something like that. So you can put that thread all the way through your communications. Big companies do this all the time. When you look at companies like Budweiser, they have sometimes some bizarre adverts where they're shouting like "What's up?" and the recent one's "Tilly Tilly." They just shout randomly, and that's it. That's the entire advert. But really, they're linking their brand to communication or to connection, and they're just trying to show that their brand is linked to connection, and they just keep on firing those two concepts together again and again and again. And we can do the same with something like control. And then when you actually go into a pub or something like that, you see lots of people connecting. You see lots of people communicating. So the idea of Budweiser comes to your mind as you walked into the pub, and then you're more likely to buy the product. Yeah. So you can use that sort of thing to prime people in certain locations as well.
So let's go through your books we've already touched on them because we've already been going off in all sorts of areas, but your book has 4 major sections. So the first one is you're talking about the subconscious thinking. Okay, yeah. So and I'd love for you to explore it, but also for those people watching and listening to this podcast, what they can do to help with that in their everyday campaigning?
Yeah, so first with subconscious thinking, it's tough to get your head around what it is because we don't actually take it on board. It's easy to understand how it helps us every day when you think about how did you do your commute this morning? So did you think about every time you turned the gear stick? Did you think about every time you put the acceleration, your foot down? No, your subconscious was driving because you've done it before lots and lots of different times. So your subconscious just takes over and does it itself. Another way of understanding subconscious, if you do the simple sum 2 plus 3, 5, right? Nice and easy. You know that. You don't have to use your fingers, hopefully. But if you do 22 times by 48, you have to start thinking about it. You have to consciously start working it through. So the 2 plus 3, subconscious thinking, happens like that in the back of your head. It's sewn into your physical brain already. But if you look at trying to work out something, using up more power, you're starting to think through things in a complicated way. That's your conscious thinking. And conscious thinking's slow, it's cumbersome, and yeah, it uses up lots of energy, which your brain tries to avoid because our brain uses about 20% of our energy overall of our body. So it wants to avoid that at all costs. So it relies on stuff you've done before, insights in the back of your head and ways and shortcuts you can get around it. So that, yeah, subconscious thinking, that's why it dominates so much. And it only asks for help from your conscious part of your brain when it has to.
Yeah. And so, how could someone, I'm just trying to think, how could a local party take that in?
Yeah, so if you think about it, the stuff I've talked about in branding is already talking about creating a social, subconscious network already in people's brains. That's what you're doing when you're putting out your messages. You're trying to physically change the nature of somebody's subconscious brain. So if you started talking about things like social care, I want it to be freedom framed as such, where I'm talking about frame, but it's framed as freedom, then you start to build up those subconscious models and you're starting to link up LibDems and your brand, your personal brand, with that concept subconsciously. So you're doing that, you're doing it all the time anyway. When you stick up lots of signs, like with the Cheshireman and Amersham campaign, you're sticking up loads and loads of signs everywhere online. And we're doing that because of social proof. That's because we're trying to access people's subconscious shortcut to say, oh, there's signs everywhere, so everyone must be voting Lib Dem. I better vote Lib Dem too.
Yeah, it's that positive peer pressure. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, social proof. So it's we do some of it already, but it's the constant thinking about the subconscious throughout our communications we don't do yet. Another one is just basically asking people on the doorstep and on the streets what they think and just believing whatever they say and then basing your messaging on that.
Yeah.
It's not
the
great.
LibDems at the moment might be doing things like this. I know this is our summer survey that we're doing local party, getting stuff like this. And even just saying so, you know, one thing that's coming up quite a lot in these surveys that we've started doing is people saying they haven't been a victim of crime, but they fear it and things like that. So that is a way, if you know that, because you can look at, again, you can look at the science and say, well, this area's got very little crime, but actually the fear of crime is actually something that people care about.
Yeah, and you can start to look at how they subconsciously think about it. The best way I've seen, maybe your listeners will know some other ways, but the best way I've seen is a Harvard system where they've looked at breaking down people's metaphors, which sounds a bit odd, but when you use a metaphor, use it every 14 words. And it's basically a little window into the subconscious models you're using to make sense of the world. So we did this in the referendum campaign or just after it, talking about a cliff edge Brexit. So that's a metaphor. And we're basically trying to wrestle the concept of control back from the Leave campaign, which are taking it over. Because when you fall off a cliff, you lose control and off you go and you plummet to your doom. So that's what we're trying to get across to everybody. And people pick up your metaphors as well. The media will run with it all day because they don't understand how dominant metaphors are. But it's actually Boris Johnson's secret weapon. We see him using in almost every communication. The other day, he was talking about one last heave. So that's a journey metaphor. It's one last heave to get to the point where we want to. So you can do this very simply by using certain metaphors which back up your branding. So if you're taking control, you use control metaphors, basically. You use freedom metaphors, and that can help that branding.
And the branding doesn't have to be, obviously there's several brands in Lib Dem kind of marketing strategy. There's not only the Lib Dem brand, but there's also the brand as you as the candidate as well. And this is for something, but very successful. I'm thinking of maybe John Pugh in Southport, Norman Lamb in North Norfolk, had a very good brand they had built up.
Yes. So what I'd say particularly Norman Lamb, a great MP, what I would say is they should have built up a Lib Dem brand as well. They've built up such a strong, it's what we've all done for a long time. We built up such a strong local champion without actually talking about what we believe in.
Yeah.
That when that person goes, we lose everything. Yeah. And to keep that person in place, we have to work so hard and for so long. And really there's Lib Dem volunteer hours being lost through ineffective communication by just using a local champion view. It's like I've seen Mark Pack describe people moving to a different party as picking a different football team before. And if you imagine, I'm a Manchester United fan, and if someone was saying to me,
out, right, we'll end this podcast right now. A Man United fan in Birmingham, that sounds about right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we're around a tough time at the moment. We don't need much more stick. But yeah, if you ask me to become a Man City fan, you could talk about how great they are with the women's team and certain policies like that. But you're not going to change me unless you change the fundamental understanding of why you are what you are. I mean, basically tribalism with that one. But
And so the second part of the second of your sections is about storytelling. Now we've had an American professor on the podcast before who talked about deep canvassing, being able to not just your simple knock on your door, how you doing, how are you going to vote, but actually telling a story and getting a more in-depth relationship with your electorate.
Yeah, so telling story, we talk about telling stories all the time, but then we miss out all the basic concepts of how you tell us a good story. So if you look at major, big popular stories, they have a simple story arc, very simple. So if you think about something like Lion King, Simba reaches a problem when his father dies. He goes off into the woods, sings Kuna Matata, and meets the love interest, who I'm pretty sure is his sister, but with the lions, we'll ignore that.
No, she's not. No, she's not. No, she's not. You listen. You've got a black mark for being a Man United fan. I'm not going to let you tell us that Lion King's an incestuous children's film.
but he then changes. He changes. So he meets a problem. He goes into the woods. He meets his love interest. He changes himself. He realizes that he can't be the kid anymore. He has to grow up and go back and win the pride back. And that's the solution. So you've got a problem, a change to meet the problem, and then a solution. It's a very simple story arc, and it's great for politics because we meet loads of problems, and then we can show what we would do to change to meet the problem, and then we'll show the solution. And it's a very simple story arc. And then when you combine that with the central question of many stories, including that one of who am I? You see this in stories all the time. Who am I changes. So you look at Simba at the beginning, it's I'm a kid. Still when he's going off into the woods, he's I don't care. And then when he develops, he changes into somebody who is responsible, has grown up. He changes the definition of who am I to be able to meet the challenge. So you can have that change of personality. So let's say a constituent comes up to you and says, I've got this problem. You can say, I didn't think it was a problem at first, but these people are talking about cladding or something like that. I didn't know it was a problem at first, but I've changed my understanding, and now I want to put forward this solution to meet the issue. So it can be quite simple to put a simple story format, and then if you link your branding through that, link your control metaphors or whatever through that, then you stay on brand as well.
Okay, and then moving on to your third section, we've already kind of talked about a little bit about metaphors and about how, and you say it's Boris Johnson's secret weapon. So is that because you've just got to be a little bit less Lib Dem in think that I've got to explain everything, and actually you can use a metaphor and get across what you need?
Yeah. Well, we use metaphors all the time naturally. What we should do is just pick them and try and be a bit more purposeful with them. We did this on the London mayoral campaign, is we started building up our metaphors around the journey, deep metaphor, the journey concept. So many of the metaphors, many of the interviews were done using that journey concept. You'd have seen Louisa on carriages and all sorts of things being pulled around. It's all to do with journey. And journey's all over the place in London, so it's a good one for London. And it's something we used. Nick Clegg was big on using journey metaphors. He used them twice as much as anybody else. It looks like somebody in HQ was trying to build a brand around the journey concept, and it's quite a good one for Liberals to try and show progress. I mean, we've been talking about journey when we talk about progressives. That's a journey metaphor itself.
Yeah, towards a better society.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay.
But as well, it's so fundamental because it's worth talking about again, that it accesses your subconscious models of how you understand the world. So there's a Professor George Lakoff in America who's advised the Democrats for a long time. And he has looked into what fundamentally is the difference between Democrats and Republicans. And what he's found is that you can put everything together using two simple models. He calls one of them a strict father model and the other one a nurturant parent model. So your strict father model, if you imagine a stereotypical strict father family, it's like a father is authoritarian, you have to do as you're told. If you do wrong, you're punished. If you look at a nurturant parent model, it's more empathy approach, and it's based on understanding. And if you do something wrong, the parents are trying to explain what's wrong and so you don't do it again. And you can see that in place when you look at the policy areas. So you look at something like a death penalty, for example. So Republicans generally support it because if you do something wrong, you need to be punished. You need to be punished hard. Whereas if you look at the Democrats, they're generally against it because if you do something wrong, you need to have rehabilitation. You need to have a way of coming back and understanding and empathy around it. The same with drugs as well. Again, they approach it in these two different ways. One's punishment, one's empathy and understanding. So these fundamental models dictate how the Democrats and Republicans both approach these different policy areas, and you can apply it all the way through the different policies which come up.
But that's really interesting. I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers will have, questions about how they can possibly do it. And I suppose your answer is buy the book first and foremost. Before we get into the final section, we should just say this book is available on Amazon for £9.99. And it'll be, I love this stuff. As you know, I'm involved with marketing and visual storytelling as a cameraman. So this sort of stuff is really interesting. And we've had loads of correspondence, especially since the 2019 general election, about how we get our message across. Because we know we've got the policies. Some people always think we need more policies, but we've got the policies, but how do we get that across? And so the fourth of your major sections in your book is about memory.
Yeah, so memory, you can see this in action right now. The Conservatives are trying to rewrite history right now. They're trying to rewrite your memories, and they can do it. The science says they can do it because memories are not a filing cabinet. You don't just file something away and then pull it back out when you want it. Memories are actually reconstructions, which we reconstruct every single time we remember something. And we do it, we reconstruct something. So if you think about your first kiss with a loved one when you're younger, right? Every time you've thought about that, you reconstruct it in your brain. And you do it again and again and again. And you might do it with new information. You might do it with your own life narrative, because we all have life narratives where we're the hero. And so we will have our narrative where oh, now we used to be very nervous and now we're really confident. So you might have thought about yourself in that first kiss moment that you're really, really nervous because that fits with it. And you might exaggerate that point. And it's been tested that if you look at people's life narratives, you can see the change with that bias of understanding now. So everything's reconstructed all the time. You go back to remember it, you use the pieces you've got in the past, but you use the pieces you've got now, and you use the pieces of your life narrative, and you create something else. And when you think about that, it does make sense. If you're at a party and something happens, but you didn't notice it, and then someone asks you about it a month later, your brain might get that information which somebody's talked about to you, said, oh, this happened. You might combine that with your understanding, and you might actually remember seeing it. Seen this a lot with witnesses and police, that you can't use suggestive questions because people, after a few lines of suggestive questions, especially over like a period of time of a week, will start to believe that they actually saw it, even to the point where they actually think they murdered somebody, and they'll admit that they did it when they haven't done anything at all.
And there's a very funny example that one of the US late night chat shows do, where they tell people a fake story and see how far they can go on with it. And and one at the moment they're saying, have you been watching the Tokyo Olympics? And obviously for anyone at the moment, Tokyo Olympics hasn't started yet. And so these people wanted to be associated with it and said, oh yeah, I've been watching it with my family, love the decathlon. So then the presenter then added more and more ridiculous things to that story. And then they bought into it because we naturally want to buy into a story.
Oh yeah. And if you once you repeated that, they might think in the future, definitely remember it. Oh, I remember sat there. I remember seeing so-and-so win. It does build up. And the Conservatives try to do this right now. So they're trying to rewrite what happened in the pandemic. They're trying to rewrite it as vaccine success. We did what we could beforehand. That's the narrative for them. But it's nowhere near the truth.
No.
But they understand that they can rewrite people's minds about it. And it started to work. You start to see people using those two narratives. Vaccine was a big success, which, partly is. It's not so much now. We are tailing off at the moment compared to other countries.
Plus, it wasn't the government. Let's just point out. I mean, the only thing the government hasn't been involved in is pretty much the vaccine thing, where the NHS has had loads of experience with it. And it's the one thing the government has actually almost taken a step back from, and it's worked.
Exactly. And this is why part of the Cummings testimony has been quite shocking to a lot of people. I know we can only take them with a pinch of salt, but it's been quite shocking because it's brought up old narratives which are against their current one, and it's fighting their confirmation bias. But it is bringing back, and that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to stop them from rewriting history and rewrite it himself in his own way.
So how practical point for, again, the local campaign? I mean, we struggled. We lost 2 seats in the May elections for nothing we had done locally. Everyone, and it was exactly what you're saying. People were saying, "I'm voting for Boris this time." That's even for a local election. So how can a local party practically use that to give people that kind of, to have our own memory coming in? I'm always going to vote for John Potter or X, Y, and Z because I know that they've done so much work and they are the people.
Yeah, so when you look at some of these memory techniques, they're morally questionable, so it's more protect against rather than do. So suggestibility, like we're talking about there, now that's what it's basically Inception. The film Inception, the suggestibility. They're trying to suggest an idea into somebody's brain. And actually that whole film's about subconscious thinking, by the way. It's all about the dream world is just their subconscious, and whether you are conscious or subconscious and which one's more dominant. But to get into the memory point is that a lot of the issues with memory, I go through about 7 issues we generally have with memory. I missed one of them off because it's to do with PTSD. We don't want to do that. But things like transience, where we forget over time, things like absent-mindedness, I go through those and say, how do we actually stop each one in the communications we put out and guard against people forgetting about things? But I also talk about how you don't necessarily need people to pay full attention and to remember something consciously.
And the classic example of that, sorry to put in, is to do with like focus leaflets. you know, and the fact is that most people, only 1 in 10 focus leaflets is ever read, but if they see them coming through the door, they'll think, and this is why people sometimes go, well, should we scrap focus leaflets? Are we still doing it? But it's that subconscious, I'm getting informed by the local Lib Dems.
Yeah, every time they get a leaflet through the door, they're seeing Lib Dem and there's the candidate's face, hopefully, on the front, right? And then that will be reinforced again and again and again. And they'll at least have some availability bias. So we go back to the shortcuts, subconscious shortcuts. One of them is availability bias. If you show something to somebody again and again and again, and big advertisers do this all the time, your Coca-Colas, McDonald's, show something to somebody again and again and again, so it's familiar, then people are more likely to trust it and want it. And that's what we do with leaflets all the time.
Yeah, and again, we're going back. I mean, we're recording this we're being very naughty, me and Richard. We're recording it on actual by-election day in Chesham and Amersham. So we'll both be getting on the phones a little bit later on to help out. But we don't know how that result is going to go. But obviously, the Lib Dem campaign seems to have done very well. And you mentioned it before. When I went down there, people were saying, oh my word, so many leaflets, so many stake boards and whatever else. But looks like we have utterly squeezed that Labour vote because people, all they see, it's that kind of perception of power that the Lib Dems now have in that seat. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And it's that availability all around the place. You'll see in our by-elections, that's one of the few cases where we've got the resources to really do an availability push is by-elections, because compared to the parties, we've got a minute amount of money. To the point where, yes, we've got only a few seats in Parliament, but if you look at the funding we've got compared to other parties, it's not too far away of what you might expect in a first past the post system. But we do very well in by-elections because we can put the full availability all over the place, and our activists are way better than everyone else's. It really is true that they just go the extra mile and are on speed half the time, running around putting leaflets through doors.
That's right.
So we have that huge advantage, but we can only use that when we target one seat and really go for it.
But we use that then to not only just create a legacy in that one seat, so you look at, say, the Witney election, we didn't get the MP, but we have now taken control of Oxfordshire County Council, or Richmond, where we lost it and then we won it. But it's the wider perception. I think this is why the National Party is pushing it so much. If you have a really good campaign, it's not an end in itself. It's that boost you have to go do other things. And again, it's about changing that narrative.
Yeah, exactly. And every time you start to use some of these stories, use a metaphor, something like control to base all of your communications on, you're not only helping yourself, you're helping everybody else if we all use the same thing. So I know we're liberals, but sometimes we do need to take a bit of direction from HQ. And if they are saying, this is our general principle, we're going to go for it, based on something like our constitution. Like what Daisy Cooper's recently done. She talked a lot about freedoms like we were before. So if they say we're going to do that, then we all need to be, you can work within a wide range by using something like a deep metaphor of control, and you can still come up with very personalized messages, but still on brand. And you can help everybody throughout the country by staying on brand with that.
Well, no, that is absolutely fascinating. I love talking about that. I could probably talk to you all day about this sort of stuff. But no, thank you so much for coming on, Richard. Like I say, I'll just repeat it again. Richard, show us your book again, Richard, for the people watching. It is The Science of Marketing for Business and Politics by Richard Maxwell. It is on Amazon. Please go buy it and help Richard out. Thank you so much for coming on the pod, Richard. It's been fantastic to hear from you. And I suppose, is there any way people can get hold of you if they want to ask you questions?
Yes, I've got a forum on Facebook called the Lib Dem Framing Forum, which is about talking about communications and learning from lots of people. We've got all sorts of people from Mark Pack to Lords to ex-ministers on there. So it's really worth going on there and posting up your communication questions, and you'll get loads of clever people messaging you back on it. So Lib Dem Framing Forum on Facebook.
There we go. I'm gonna go sort myself out and make sure I log in as well. But no, Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you everyone for listening and watching. You can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem podcast at Lib Dem Pod. If you want to email us questions or anything at all, comment, like, do anything like that. All helps spread the pod around. If you do want to become a Patreon subscriber, please do so, because it really helps us keep the show going, allows us to get extra guests. I mean, a lot of you watched the John Curtis one that we put in, which has topped all our polls for the best ever podcast we've ever done. So, and it allows us to do things like that. So if you can become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/LibDemPod, we really appreciate it. And just thanks again to Richard. It's a brilliant episode, and all the best for the book, and we'll no doubt see you soon.
Thanks, John. Really good pod, and thank you very much for doing it.